Well, this has been an exciting event for me to anticipate because I see this event, thanks to Sarah Stern, as being the first public event inaugurating phase 2 of Title VI reform. 10 years ago, it was Sarah Stern and Stanley Kurtz who, with Martin Kramer, author of the landmark Ivory Towers on Sand, took the lead in phase 1. And what did they accomplish in phase 1? In phase 1, they not only identified the problem and asked universities to address it, but they succeeded in having Congress to identify the problem and ask universities to address it. Now there's a second phase, which they asked Congress to do at the time, but Congress didn't do. Second phase is, okay, you've identified the problem, you've asked universities to address it, now hold universities accountable. Congress didn't do that. There were proposals for how they could. They didn't in reauthorization 5 years ago, which is why there's a phase 2 that begins today. And phase 2 is to ask, will universities be held accountable if they fail to do what Congress has already asked them to do, and they fail to address the problem that has now been publicly well known for a decade? I'm going to say just a little bit about phase 1 and then turn to phase 2. One piece I'm going to add about phase 1 deals with civil rights because that's my background. Now the problem here is not primarily or exclusively about civil rights. When Title VI funds are misused by universities, the real problem is that our national security suffers. I think Stanley Kurtz is very strong on that. It explains that Title VI was established for a reason, which is that we need people who are trained to translate and interpret in languages that are not otherwise widely understood within our intelligence services or our defense establishment. When universities take the government money and don't use it in the intended purpose, we all suffer as Americans because our national security interests are compromised. Now, as a civil rights lawyer, I have another interest in this, and it's similar to what Tammy Rossman Benjamin was describing. And I would say I'm so excited not just to be with the people who led phase 1 and are with us, but I would say Tammy and Wynn are providing the research that will fuel at least part of phase 2. So I was staff director of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights half a dozen years ago or so, and we issued a report on campus anti-Semitism. And it was in the context of anti-Semitism that the Civil Rights Commission made the following finding. Substantial evidence suggests that many university departments of Middle East studies provide one-sided, highly polemical academic presentations, and some may repress legitimate debate concerning Israel. This would include, for example, any program in which a student is told that she may not speak in a discussion of Middle East politics on the ground that she has ethnic Jewish physical characteristics. A real example from an Ivy League institution that receives Title VI funds. Now, the important part of this, I think that what I've just read 2 sentences of summarizes some of what you've heard today, but this is the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and the reason that the Commission was concerned about it was that even aside from the national security problem, there's the question of to what extent biased, politicized, anti-Israel, virulently anti-Israel public events and universities and teaching in universities also have a spillover effect that harms Jewish students on campuses. How can it be that you will have this constant barrage of anti-Israel inflammatory material coming from professors and expect that it will be unrelated to the hostile environments that some Jewish students are facing at some universities? That's why it's not just Jewish organizations or activist organizations that are saying this. That's why it's the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights that was saying this, right? And part of this was phase 1. This is identifying the problem and asking universities to address it, but that's not enough. So what did the Commission on Civil Rights say should be done at the time? Here I'm quoting again. University leadership should ensure that all academic departments, including departments in Middle East Studies, maintain academic standards, respect intellectual diversity, and ensure that the rights of all students are fully protected. Federal grant-making institutions should exercise appropriate oversight to ensure that federal funds are not used in a manner that supports discriminatory conduct. Okay? So 2 pieces. Universities have to solve the problem, and they need to be held accountable if they don't. Accountable by whom? By federal grant-making institutions, which primarily means the U.S. Department of Education, and specifically Office of Post-Secondary Education within Ed. So what happened from this recommendation and from the great work of the leaders in Phase 1? Again, Phase 1 succeeded. We identified the problem. Congress required that universities that accept Title VI money indicate in various ways, assure, describe, indicate how they will provide a diversity of use. Congress was also clear that it was not attempting in any way to dictate curriculum. But as Stanley Kurtz mentioned, this is not just a curricular matter. Here we have federal funds being used in public outreach methods, public outreach events that essentially indoctrinate the public based on one-sided, politicized information about the Middle East. So ask the university to solve it, and if they don't, hold them accountable. Now, how do you hold them accountable? Well, I have essentially the same 3 that Stanley had. The first one was already before Congress, and that was create an oversight board. Now, in my view, an oversight board is in some ways, I think it was a great idea, but in some ways not quite enough, and in some ways too much. Too much in the sense that it created what I think was a false fear that there would be some encroachment on academic freedom. If done properly, an oversight board needn't have that problem. On the other hand, the question is going to be, okay, you have an oversight board, is that really going to be enough to prevent violations of this requirement or not? That's why I think that option 2 is critical, and would be critical even if Congress had created some kind of accountability. And again, they created no kind of accountability. They created a requirement, describe how you're going to have a diverse range of perspectives, but no way of enforcing that. How do you enforce it? Well, we don't have to start from scratch. Congress and the Department of Education already know how to do this. They already know how to address universities that take federal money and then fail to comply with federal requirements. Not only do they know how to do it, but they have procedures in place, they have policies in place, they have staff in place, they have offices set up, they have people trained, and what we need to do, what we could do to solve this problem and provide accountability is simply to address these problems under Title VI of the Higher Education Act in the same way that we are already enforcing Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which is to say, create a complaint resolution procedure under which those people who are aware of violations go to the Department of Education. The Department of Education investigates. If there's a violation, the department asks the university to voluntarily resolve it. If the university doesn't, then there's a penalty. What would the penalty be? Well, there are at least 3 different choices, depending on how strong or weak we want to be. At the strongest, we could say, and I'm not sure if I entirely grasp this, so I don't want to mischaracterize it, but we could say, if you take a nickel of our funds here, we own you, meaning that if you violate our rules, you will get no federal funds for your university. Not just for Middle East Studies, but for anything you do in the university. That's actually what the law is right now under the Civil Rights Act. You discriminate against one student, you're on notice and you fail to comply with it, the resolution available to the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights is to take out all money going to the entire university and all of its programs. That is, I would say, an extreme approach, although it happens to be what the government currently does elsewhere. On the other side, we could say, okay, so you violate the statute, we will take note of it, and we will either debar you from getting federal funds in the future, or alternatively, we will simply use this in mind when you go for a renewal. And then in the middle, I would say, is the prospect that we would say, you have a grant with X dollars for your Middle East Studies program. You already committed that when you took those dollars, you would have a diversity of perspectives, and you described what you were going to do. But in fact, you didn't provide a diversity of perspectives, so give us that grant money back. We're not going to close down your whole university. We're not going to take back every dime. We're not going to say nobody can get a Pell Grant to go to your university anymore. We're just going to say that since you are misusing the Title VI grant, you are out of the program. It is astonishing to me that Congress was so clear-minded during the last reauthorization process that it got the problem, and it established as a matter of law that universities need not only to have a diversity of perspectives within these programs, but they need to describe in advance what they're going to do. But then said nothing, perhaps in the heat of the legislative moment, said nothing about how we would make sure that that's going to happen. And the Department of Education in its regulatory process didn't provide that either. So if we're serious about this problem, and if we recognize based on the new research that it has not been solved in the 5 or 6 years since the last reauthorization, then I think we need to ask the question, why aren't we holding universities accountable when they fail to do what Congress has already asked them to do?
Thank you very much. Excellent.